Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm on my way to work, and I thought I'd tell you about some of the work that Peggy's had done on her recently, and how we solved a big problem that was making a lot of noise, and you might have even noticed it on some of the podcasts. So, we're going to have to cast our minds way back for the start of this big problem to when I went and did a trip round Yorkshire with the motorist. We went up and did a trip round Yorkshire for the motorist to celebrate the opening of their Arnage restaurant, and it involved kind of a big drive round, a lunch stop, a big drive round, and then kind of dinner and celebrations at the new restaurant. And it was a lovely day, but partway round I noticed a kind of large bang noise coming from the rear suspension behind myself. And it was kind of whenever we went down a big dip, there was quite a large bang noise, like it was bottoming out. And I was a little bit concerned, but we kind of carried on, and luckily the drive home late that night was along the A1, which was reasonably well smoothed and everything, so it wasn't too much of an issue on the way home. But the next day it was still there and still kind of worrying me. So I started to kind of try and investigate it myself, jacked up the back, took the wheels off to see if we could see any differences between either of the two sides of the suspension, to see what was making the noise on one side and not the other, and we really couldn't see anything. So when I took it, luckily, to the local Peterborough branch event for MMOC the next Tuesday, Lewis came and had a little look underneath as well, and he couldn't really spot anything, but suggested that it might well be something like the spring having dropped, or the shock kind of ran out of power. So I took it to a local garage and asked him to have a little look and see if he could spot what it was, so that I could get the parts ordered and put it in with them to have the work done. I know rear suspension probably isn't the most difficult job in the world, but it being kind of our only daily at the time, it wasn't really an option to take her off the road for more than a day. So putting her in the garage for the day when I was working from home was the best kind of option that we could get with at the time. We got all the parts ordered. The guy at the garage had said, look, it doesn't look like it's anything dangerous, it's just bottoming out, so you can carry on driving it until you've got the parts and got booked in. Now, a whole rear suspension rebuild requires quite a few different parts: bushes, shock absorbers, or dampers, whatever you want to call them, and new springs. And if you're doing one side, you might as well do the whole of it. So we did that, but the problem I came across was that reviews for new leaf springs are horrific. They're not noted to do particularly well, and really we wanted kind of something that was going to last. I think most people say, oh, they last about 100 miles, which for me could be a week if I was busy, kind of thing, which isn't great for kind of how frequently I use her and them dropping. So we looked into kind of what we could find online of old springs that people had taken off cars that were in pretty good condition, and it turned out that I was looking at kind of travelling quite far to get a set of really decent springs, considering getting a set of traveller springs with the extra kind of leaf in them for further strength. But then it turned out that Lewis had completely forgot that he'd got a set of springs and a rear axle that he'd taken off a car. So I bought just the springs off him, really, and they were in pretty good nick. The car that he'd taken it off hadn't done a huge amount of mileage, so they were all right. So we took them kind of apart a bit, spread them out, cleaned them up, greased them up in between, and then kind of with everything else that we had to do, then took them off to the guy at the garage. She was with him for kind of a day and a bit of the next morning. Luckily for my job, it was in kind of marking period, so I was working from home for most of it, so it wasn't too problematic for me, and not being able to kind of get to places. And I went and picked her up and drove her down the road, and the rear suspension felt immaculate. It was kind of completely new car feel for a little while. But then on my little test drive, we went down a big dip just to kind of, I'd usually avoid them, to be honest, but I went down one just to test it, and it made the noise, and I was like, no, because to be honest with you, I think the whole kind of, all of the parts, because I'd gone for the uprated dampers and everything to try and give it the best, especially with the fen roads the way that they are, to try and give it the best chance of surviving and doing really well. I'd gone for all this uprated stuff, and it still made the noise, and I was like, oh gosh, it was more than slightly annoying, because I think it had come to something like £600 with the labour and the parts and everything, which is no small amount for it to have not solved my problem. So we took some kind of further investigation, and I took it to my dad, and he had a nosy. And we noticed that the plate that the bump stop hits on that side was loose. And that meant that when it did hit the bump stop, it was making a horrific noise, but it was also hitting the bump stop sooner than on the other side, because it was kind of dangling a little bit lower. So we needed to book her in for some welding to reattach that part. But also I looked into kind of ways that we could make that rear suspension that bit higher, again, to try and reduce the amount of times that she would ever get near that, even when it was all fixed. And I came across these extended rear leaf springer hangers, but they were kind of not stocked anymore by, I think it was by Charles Ware, to be honest. And so I was talking to some of the young members about it, and Lewis was able to get a couple made, which was really fortunate, and so we got those fitted pretty quickly, thanks to my dad, and an afternoon to the back, just to give it that little bit more height and reduce the chances of it hitting, whilst we waited for kind of the welder to have space. And various things happened with the welder that meant that by the end of summer, so like from April time to the end of summer, we'd still not managed to get her all booked in and get that noise fully dealt with. And by this time she needed another piece of welding as well, which was really annoying. So in the end, my dad said, look, this guy that we know's got a garage, we'll try and get it booked in there and get him to kind of do that. So we got it booked in, went in, dealt with, and for, I think it must be nearly a month now, we've been driving around with no annoying and slightly terrifying bang from the back. The welding, including another bit, kind of cost about £200, and that was reduced by the fact that we'd bought the panel from ESM as well, and the fact that my dad was able to kind of go into the garage and help out so that it wasn't two men on the job, which I was really fortunate for. But the idea that I'd spent £600 on a whole new rear suspension, which is lovely and has massively reduced some of the bouncing you get if you're sat in the back, but wasn't strictly necessary, is a little bit awkward, really. It's certainly something to have to deal with, and it just goes to show that fixing these old cars when you have a clear idea of what the problem is can be easier than a modern car, but trying to work out where that noise is coming from and exactly what's causing it can take a couple of attempts, and that certainly was the case in Peggy's case. And she got treated to a whole new rear suspension, and then some welding and everything, and it's wonderful now. She's a lot quieter as a ride now, but it really does go to show that fixing these cars isn't always as simple as people kind of want it to be. Not long after we'd booked it in with my dad's friend garage, we'd taken it for a trip up to Leeds to go to Leeds Music Festival. Don't worry, Peggy wasn't kind of parked in with all the riots and things like that happened. We were staying at a campsite kind of down the road and taxiing in every day. But she made the trip up there, no problem. Did a kind of quick food and supplies shop on the day that we arrived up there, and then was set to kind of take us all home. And it must have been somewhere along the A1, an exhaust that was already blowing a bit decided it was going to blow a whole lot more, and disconnected from the first silencer on my big board exhaust, and it suddenly got very loud in here. We had Jamie and one of my friends in here. The other three friends were in a van that was kind of in convoy with us, that had kind of all the camping gear and stuff in it, and we all noticed when it had happened because it was really making quite a noise. We pulled in for some petrol, and Jamie had a quick look underneath, and it was quite an obvious separation between the two. But yeah, it meant that Peggy also required a new exhaust fitting, which, when it's kind of a big board exhaust, is a little bit more difficult than fitting the standard exhaust back on. But got an exhaust ordered, and I went for a big board exhaust because that's what she already had. It was the sound that I was kind of used to, and all the things that help make a Moggy make that trumping noise that people are so fond of have already been changed out in Peggy, so we weren't going to be able to get that noise back in any way. So it was better to have a nice big exhaust that helps her breathe a little bit better, all things considered. So we fitted one of those once again, and yeah, it's not a straightforward fit from what we've seen. It takes a little bit of wiggling and working out kind of how to get it over and avoid things like the petrol tank and the suspension, especially as it comes towards the back. But she's sounding a lot quieter and a lot smoother now, although I think the exhaust needs shifting over a tiny bit towards the end just to stop a little bit of a rattle when we first start up in the mornings of that exhaust kind of knocking up against some of the bodywork. But yeah, that's a pretty comprehensive list of all the work that Peggy's had done over the summer. You might have seen that we've also fitted a Ram air filter to try and kind of improve breathing in other regards there. But overall, it's just the beginning. We've got so much more stuff that needs doing. I recently went and had a chat with a luckily local minor specialist about a big kind of respray and paintwork in a year and a half or so's time, and kind of getting an idea of how much we need to save up for that, and what will need to be done. And it was so good to go and see someone so knowledgeable and so experienced in restoring Morris minors, because they were able to kind of put my mind at ease about some stuff and kind of let me know about other stuff that might need doing kind of in the meantime between now and then. We've also hopefully got a little bit of time where Peggy's going away really soon, but I've recorded a load of podcasts kind of in advance for you guys with some really interesting stuff coming up. So hopefully you enjoy some of that we pop out on the channel while she's away. You won't even notice. But yeah, this is season 4, and hopefully you've really enjoyed that kind of update on what Peggy's had done, what she's still got to have done, and just the things of keeping a car like her on the road. I'm really fortunate that I've got such a knowledgeable support system around me for helping with some of these jobs, because yeah, they would have been more expensive and more difficult without them. So I've got to kind of be quite grateful for that, because all the money that's kind of saved on some of those jobs is now going towards a bodywork restoration fund, I guess. So yeah, we'll see where that takes us in a few years' time. But yeah, in the meantime, I'd love to hear kind of stuff that you've got planned for your cars over winter, because we're obviously coming into the winter season. I know loads of people take their cars off of the road for doing various pieces of work, so please let me know what you've got planned, because I'd love to hear. Probably don't need any inspiration, because Peggy's going to cost me enough money in what she actually needs, as well as additional stuff. But yeah, I'd love to hear. But in the meantime, drive safely and happy motoring.